Alrighty guys, welcome to the video. So today in this video, what I wanted to go over is a really important process that all of you should be paying attention to when you're trying to lower your system latency beyond just trying to increase your frame rate or, for example, increase your system responsiveness, because there is a sort of fundamental basis that is happening underneath all of that, which is known as your interrupt affinities, or essentially your DPC latency. And what DPC latency stands for is deferred procedure call, or essentially an interrupt, which what that means is that when the system has, for example, a device that has to get priority for something, it will interrupt whatever the Windows operating system is doing and will say, hey, do this first rather than doing the next thing in the queue. And it does that for obvious reasons, like if your mouse is, moving or doing something, that needs to be first in the queue. And so I ran this latency mon software for 1 minute, just to give you an example of how many interrupts or DPC counts that we have in 1 minute. And so if I go into my CPU side right here, we can see that we have many thousands, if not tens of thousands of interrupts happening all the time across every single one of our cores. Now, the problem is that a lot of people wonder why disabling core 0 on your affinity when you're playing a game helps your responsiveness and helps your frame rate sometimes. That's because core 0 handles the highest amount of interrupts on your system. Because if you have too many interrupts on one single core, it can cause an excess of input lag or responsiveness, because if that takes too long of a time to finish up that interrupt, that can cause a system responsiveness drop. And that's why it's so valuable to improve this sort of feature without having to, do too much of some troubleshooting. So this software helps us figure out what sort of drivers and what sort of software we can use to troubleshoot. And so I wanted to do a quick demonstration of why this matters. And so if we see a picture down here in the bottom left of a character like, let's say, Genji. Well, Genji is going to dash right behind me here in this example, and I have to do a 180-degree flick. Well, in that time, we may have dozens, if not hundreds of interrupts, unfortunately, at that time that I'm doing that 180-degree flick. Well, if all of them are being handled on one core, there's no guarantee that we can keep the actual latency count per count of DPC even across the entire time. So that's the problem, is that if it can cause too many interrupts, they take too long, and that can cause input lag issues and responsiveness issues, and I guess the evenness or the cleanness of how you make a responsive image or essentially an application work, like doing a flick, for example. And so the way that we fix that is if we use the interrupt affinity policy configuration tool. What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to look at all of the devices in your device manager. And what you're going to want to do is go devices by connection. And you're going to want to sort this down. I, for example, took just a simple notepad or like a sticky note, and I wrote down all of the most important things in my system. And so, for example, the LPC controller controls my programmable interrupt controller, my high precision event timer, and all of that fun stuff. And so if I minimize that, you'll notice that there's nothing else on that specific device driver. And so I went down and I separated all of them. So this one was my SSD, so I gave that to a separate core. This one is on another part of my PCI Express, and I gave that one a separate core as well, in order to defer or essentially spread out the amount of interrupts happening on one single core. Another one, for example, is to do it on the USB hub, and then to go further down into that is to specify the mouse that you're using. And so, for example, my Razer Viper V2 Pro, you can specify that on another core for an interrupt if you're even more inclined to try to reduce latency. And so you want to go through here and you want to analyze all of the different things that LatencyMon is saying are problem drivers. So for example, our highest reported DPC routine time, or routine execution time, was, for example, our network driver interface specification. Yeah, that's our network drive, or essentially our Ethernet or Wi-Fi driver. And so what I did here in the interrupt affinity tool is I specified that if I set mask, I specified this to core 6, because core 6 wasn't being utilized by anything else in the system. And so then if I go down into here and I go to core 6, we can see that now that is a very low amount in comparison to everything else. But yours might have many double, if not triple digit levels of microseconds. And so that's why we want to care about this so much, is because yours will probably have latency spikes in the tens of thousands. I've seen this go into crazy high numbers. And if that happens multiple times, that is 30 times, if not 100 times more interrupts and latency introduced into the system. And so that's the quickest and easiest way to narrow down latency in your system and to prevent DPC latency spikes that actually can have a dramatic effect on a lot of the system responsiveness and the cleanness of the entire operating system. And so, yeah, guys, just go through here and find all of the different devices in your device manager that you are going to be using. So all of them, you want to make sure that you spread them across as many cores as possible. And if you only have a few cores, like let's say you only have 4 cores, well, for example, if we can't be super specific about each device, then we can be as specific as a broad term. So for example, this one is my GPU, and then this one is my entire USB hub, and then this one's my Wi-Fi, and then all of the stuff above here is, for example, the other stuff that's happening in the system, like my SSDs. Well, I can put one core with an SSD, one core with the USB hub, one core with the Wi-Fi, and then one core with the, for example, GPU. That's a way of spreading out all of the interrupts, and we can't guarantee the lowest latency because we have only a few select amount of cores, but that's better than having them all on one single core. And that is the best way to reduce the actual execution time and the actual interrupt latency over the entire system. And if you do it correctly, you'll notice that as you rerun this sort of process, like right here, you'll notice that the numbers will go all the way down to as low as 4, 5, sometimes 3. And that is where you want to be. You don't want to be having spikes that are in the triple digits. That's just too high. And you want to try to keep it below 50 if you really can get super specific. And so, yeah, guys, hopefully you enjoyed this video. Please leave a like in the comments, and please, share this with other people and subscribe for more content like this. Have a good one, guys. My name's Savitarax, and I'm out.